every kid in this country who has the ability to be able to go to a public college or university tuition free. And by the way, I want to substantially lower student debt interest rates in this country as well. How do I pay for it? I pay for it through a tax on Wall Street speculation. This country and the middle class bailed out Wall Street. Now it is Wall Street's time to help the middle class. In fact, we have documented, unlike Secretary Clinton, I have documented exactly how I would pay for our ambitious agenda.
Andrea, I'm the only
Secretary
person on
Clinton,
this
he
stage
mentioned her.
to
So Secretary Clinton, you want to respond?
Well, I have actually documented every way that I'm going to pay for what I'm doing because I think the American public deserves to know, and you can go to my website and actually see that. But there are serious questions about how we're going to pay for what we want to see our country do. And I'm the only candidate standing here tonight who has said, I will not raise taxes on the middle class. I want to raise incomes, not taxes. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that the wealthy pay for debt-free tuition, for child care, for paid family leave. To help us bring down student debt, we're going to refinance that student debt, saving kids thousands of dollars. Yeah, and that will also come out of some of the pockets of people in the financial services industry. But I will tell you exactly how I pay for everything I propose.
Here is the major point.
Let me ask you a question about taxes, because the most Googled political issue in the last month was taxes. Now, in your health care plan, the plan you released tonight, you would not only raise taxes on the wealthy. The details you released indicate you would raise taxes on the middle class also. Is that correct?
What is correct, and I'm disappointed that Secretary Clinton's campaign has made this criticism. It's a Republican criticism. Secretary Clinton does know a lot about health care. And she understands, I believe, that a Medicare for All single-payer program will substantially lower the cost of health care for middle-class families. So what we have got to acknowledge, and I hope the Secretary does, is we are doing away with private health insurance premiums. So instead of paying $10,000 to Blue Cross or Blue Shield, yes, some middle-class families would be paying slightly more in taxes, but the result would be that that middle-class family would be saving some $5,000 in health care costs. A little bit more in taxes, do away with private health insurance premiums. It's a pretty good deal.
Senator, let me just follow up on that, because on Meet the Press on December 20th, you said that you would only raise taxes on the middle class to pay for family leave. And having said that, now you say you're going to raise middle class taxes to pay for health care as well. Is that breaking your word?
No, it is not breaking my word. It's one thing to say I'm raising taxes. It's another thing to say that we are doing away with private health insurance premiums. So if I save you $10,000 in private health insurance, and you pay a little bit more in taxes, in total, there are huge savings in what your family is spending.
Senator, I'm the only person on this stage that's actually balanced a budget every year for 15 years.
I was mayor for 8 years. I did that as well.
Okay, so that was 8 years. Yes. And Senator, but I actually did it during a budget downtime, during a recession. And Andrea, I had to make more cuts than any governor in the history of the state of Maryland, but we invested more in infrastructure, more in transportation. We made our public schools #1 in America 5 years in a row, and went 4 years in a row without a penny's increase to college tuition. The things that we need to do in our country, like debt-free college in the next 5 years, like making national service a universal option in order to cut youth unemployment in half in the next 3 years. All of these things can be done if we eliminate one entitlement we can no longer afford as a nation. And that is the entitlement that the super wealthy among us, those making more than $1 million, feel that they are entitled to paying a much lower marginal tax rate than was usual for the better part of these 80 years. And if we tax earnings from investments on money, namely capital gains, at the same rate as we tax earnings from sweat and hard work and toil, we can make the investments we need to make our country better.
We've got a lot of ground to cover here. Many Democratic voters are passionate about the need to do something to combat the threat of climate change, including the team of scientists from YouTube's Minute Earth channel. Here's their take.
Hello from Minute Earth. Fossil Fossil fuels have long kept our cars moving and our light bulbs lit. But we now know that burning these fuels releases heat-trapping gases that are warming the planet, causing seas to rise and contributing to extreme weather events like South Carolina's devastating flooding last year. Fighting human-caused climate change means giving up our global addiction to fossil fuels and shifting the bulk of the world's energy supply to alternative sources. Some countries have acted decisively to make this transition, but here at home, we still get a whopping 82% of our energy from coal, oil, and natural gas. In the U.S., political gridlock, pressure from industry lobbyists, and insufficient R&D have made an already tough battle against climate change even tougher.
Senator Sanders, Americans love their SUVs, which spiked in sales last year as gas prices plummeted. How do you convince Americans that the problem of climate change is so urgent that they need to change their behavior?
I think we already are. Younger generation understands it instinctively. I was home in Burlington, Vermont on Christmas Eve. The temperature was 65 degrees. People in Vermont know what's going on. People who did ice fishing where their ice is no longer there on the lake understand what's going on. I'm on both the environmental and energy committees. The debate is over. Climate change is real. It is already causing major problems. And if we do not act boldly and decisively, a bad situation will become worse. It is amazing to me, and I think we'll have agreement on this up here, that we have a major party called the Republican Party that is so owned by the fossil fuel industry and their campaign contributions that they don't even have the courage, the decency to listen to the scientists. It is beyond my comprehension how we can elect the President of the United States, somebody like Trump, who believes that climate change is a hoax invented by the Chinese. Bottom line is, we need to be bold and decisive. We can create millions of jobs. We must, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. I've got the most comprehensive legislation in the Senate to do that, and as president, I will fight to make that happen.
Governor O'Malley, 30 seconds, sir.
Thank you. Lester, on this stage tonight, this Democratic stage, where we actually believe in science, I would like to challenge and invite my colleagues here on this stage to join me in putting forward a plan to move us to a 100% clean electric energy grid by 2050. It can be done with solar, with wind, with new technologies, with green buildings. This can happen, but President Obama made us more energy independent. But then all of the above strategy didn't land us on the moon. We need American ingenuity, and we need to reach this goal by 2050 for the sake of our kids.
That's time. We're going to take a break. When we return, the late-breaking developments regarding Iran. The threat of ISIS now more real than ever on U.S. soil. Americans in fear and hearing few good answers. We'll be right back. You call yourself a Democratic socialist, and throughout your career in politics, you've been critical of the Democratic Party, even saying in a book you wrote, quote, there wasn't a hell of a big difference between the two major parties. How will you win a general election labeling yourself a Democratic socialist?
Because what I believe and what I was just saying, the Democratic Party needs major reform. To those of you in South Carolina, you know what, in Mississippi, we need a 50-state strategy so that people in South Carolina and Mississippi can get the resources that they need. Instead of being dependent on super PACs, what we need is to be dependent on small individual campaign contributors. We need an agenda that speaks to the needs of working families and low-income people.
The most recurring question I get when I stand on the chair all across Iowa and talk with my neighbors is, how are you going to heal the divisions and the wounds in our country? This is the biggest challenge we face as a people. All my life, I've brought people together over deep divides and very old wounds, and that's what we need now in a new leader. We cannot keep talking past each other, declaring all Republicans are our enemies, or the war is all about being against millionaires or billionaires, or it's all against American Muslims or all against immigrants. Look, as Frederick Douglass said, we are one. Our cause is one, and we must help each other if we're going to succeed.
Back. I'm Chuck Todd. We are just past the halfway mark in our NBC News YouTube Democratic candidates debate. Boy, this is one that has actually lived up to the billing. We've seen some sharp exchanges on guns, health care, and Wall Street. It's a debate, you could argue, that has been largely focused on all things Bernie Sanders. He was on the defensive early, Hillary Clinton getting, I think, some control on the gun issue. But on health care and on Wall Street reform, it was Hillary Clinton on the defensive and was a very aggressive Bernie Sanders. One thing of note here, Bernie Sanders very much being the sort of revolutionary candidate, major change. And you've heard a lot of Hillary Clinton saying things like she wants to build on the things that President Obama did, wrapping herself in President Obama. Let's go back downstairs and check in with our moderators, Lester and Andrea. So what's coming up next, guys?
Well, we've covered a lot of ground already, but we're going to be talking about ISIS, a threat to America. It's always posed as one of the top concerns of Americans, and also some more late-breaking news.
We have all of the news that has happened from Iran and the president's comments today, as well as what this means going forward for the war on terror. What do we expect from Iran, and also what's happening in Syria? So a lot of foreign policy coming up.
A lot of debate to come. We'll be back from Charleston after this.
You got it. Well, it's the Commander-in-Chief test. That's what's next. Stay with us. The debate resumes right after this.
Where we disagree is the comments that Senator Sanders has made that don't just affect me, I can take that, but he's criticized President Obama for taking donations from Wall Street. And President Obama has led our country out of the Great Recession. Senator Sanders called him weak, disappointing. He even in 2011 publicly sought someone to run in a primary against President Obama. Now, I personally believe that President Obama's work to push through the Dodd-Frank bill and then to sign it was one of the most important regulatory schemes we've had since the 1930s. So I'm going to defend Dodd-Frank, and I'm going to defend President Obama for taking on Wall Street, taking on the financial industry, and getting results.
Andrea Mitchell has questions now for the candidates, starting with Iran.
Thank you, Lester. Senator Sanders, the nuclear deal is now in force. Iran is getting its billions of dollars. Several Americans who had been held are now going to be heading home. The president said today it's a good day for diplomacy. Is it time now to restore diplomatic relations for the first time since 1979 and actually reopen a U.S. embassy in Tehran?
I think what we have got to do is move as aggressively as we can to normalize relations with Iran, understanding that Iran's behavior in so many ways is something that we disagree with. Their support for terrorism, the anti-American rhetoric that we're hearing from some of their leadership is something that is not acceptable. On the other hand, the fact that we managed to reach an agreement, something that I very strongly supported, that prevents Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and that we did that without going to war, and that I believe we're seeing a thaw in our relationships with Iran is a very positive step. So if your question is, do I want to see that relationship become more positive in the future? Yes. Can I tell you that we should open an embassy in Tehran tomorrow? No, I don't think we should. But I think the goal has got to be, as we have done with Cuba, to move and warm relations with a very powerful and important country in this world.
Your response, Secretary Clinton.
Well, I'm very proud of the Iran nuclear agreement. I was very pleased to be part of what the president put into action when he took office. I was responsible for getting those sanctions imposed, which put the pressure on Iran that brought them to the negotiating table, which resulted in this agreement. And so they have been, so far, following their requirements under the agreement. But I think we still have to carefully watch them. We've had one good day over 36 years, and I think we need more good days before we move more rapidly toward any kind of normalization. And we have to be sure that they are truly going to implement the agreement, and then we have to go after them on a lot of their other bad behavior in the region, which is causing enormous problems in Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and elsewhere.
Well,
Andrea,
you mentioned Syria. Let me ask you about Syria, all of you. Let's turn to Syria, the civil war that has been raging there. Are there any circumstances in which you could see deploying significant numbers of ground forces in Syria, not just special forces, special operators, but significant ground forces to combat ISIS in a direct combat role? Let me start with you, Secretary Clinton.
Absolutely not. I have a three-point plan that does not include American ground forces. It includes the United States leading an air coalition, which is what we are doing, supporting fighters on the ground, the Iraqi army, which is beginning to show more ability, the Sunni fighters that we are now helping to reconstitute, and Kurdish fighters on both sides of the border. I think we also have to try to disrupt their supply chain of foreign fighters and foreign money, and we do have to contest them in online space. So I'm very committed to both going after ISIS, but also supporting what Secretary Kerry is doing to try to move on a political, diplomatic course to try to begin to slow down and hopefully end the carnage in Syria, which is the root of so many of the problems that we see in the region and beyond.
Senator Sanders, ground forces, yes or no?
As everybody here knows, this is an incredibly complicated and difficult issue, and I applaud. I know President Obama's been getting a lot of criticism on this. I think he is doing the right thing. What the nightmare is, which many of my Republican colleagues appear to want, is to not have learned the lesson of Iraq, to get American young men and women involved in perpetual warfare in the quagmire of Syria and the Middle East would be an unmitigated disaster that, as president, I will do everything in my power to avoid.
Andrea,
We should learn from King Abdullah of Jordan, one of the few heroes in a very unheroic place. And what Abdullah said is this is a war for the soul of Islam, and that Muslim troops should be on the ground with our support and the support of other major countries. That is how we destroy ISIS, not with American troops in perpetual warfare.
Governor O'Malley.
Thank you. Andrea, governors have led us to victory in 2 world wars. by doing what America does best, and that is by joining forces with others, by acting in coalition. And I believe that President Obama is doing the right thing in this case. We need to learn the lessons from the past. We do need to provide the special ops advisors. We do need to provide the technical support. But over the long term, we need to develop new alliances. We need a much more proactive national security strategy that reduces these threats before they rise to a level where it feels like we need to pull for a division of Marines. And I also want to add one other thing here. I appreciate the fact that in our debate, we don't use the term you hear Republicans throwing around, trying to look all bravado and macho, sending other kids into combat. They keep using the term boots on the ground. A woman in Burlington, Iowa said to me, "Governor, when you're with your colleagues, please don't refer to my son, who has served 2 tours of duty in Iraq, as a pair of boots on the ground." We need to be mindful of learning the lessons of the past.
I have a question for Senator Sanders. Did the policies of the Obama administration, in which Secretary Clinton, of course, was a part, create a vacuum in Iraq and Syria that helped ISIS grow?
No, I think the vacuum was created by the disastrous war in Iraq, which I vigorously opposed. Not only did I vote against it, I helped lead the opposition. And what happened there is, yeah, it's easy to get rid of a 2-bit dictator like Saddam Hussein, but there wasn't the kind of thought as to what happens the day after you get him and what kind of political vacuum occurs and who rises up. Groups like ISIS. So I think that President Obama made a promise to the American people when he ran. And he said, you know what, I'm going to do my best to bring American troops home. And I supported what he did. Our job is to train and provide military support for Muslim countries in the area who are prepared to take on ISIS. And one point I want to make here that is not made very often. You have incredibly wealthy countries in that region. Countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like Qatar. Qatar happens to be the largest, wealthiest country per capita in the world. They have got to start putting in some skin in the game and not just ask the United States to do it.
Secretary Clinton, I want to talk to you about red lines because former Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel said in a recent interview that President Obama's decision to stand down on planned missile strikes against Damascus after Assad had used chemical weapons hurt the president's credibility. Should the president have stuck to his red line once he drew it?
Look, I think that the president's decision to go after the chemical weapons once there was a potential opportunity to build on when the Russians opened that door, resulted in a very positive outcome. We were able to get the chemical weapons out. I know from my own experience as Secretary of State that we were deeply worried about Assad's forces using chemical weapons because it would have had not only a horrific effect on people in Syria, but it could very well have affected the surrounding states, Jordan, Israel, Lebanon, Turkey. So getting those chemical weapons out was a big deal.
Should he have stuck to his line? Did it hurt U.S. credibility?
I think as Commander-in-Chief, you've got to constantly be evaluating the decisions you have to make. I know a little bit about this, having spent many hours in the Situation Room advising President Obama. And I want to just add to something that Senator Sanders said. The United States had a very big interest in trying to help stabilize the region. If there is any blame to be spread around, it starts with the Prime Minister of Iraq, who sectarianized his military, setting Shia against Sunni. It is amplified by Assad, who has waged one of the bloodiest, most terrible attacks on his own people, 250,000 plus dead, millions fleeing, causing this vacuum that has been filled, unfortunately, by terrorist groups, including ISIS. So I think we are in the midst of great turmoil in this region. We have a proxy conflict going on between Saudi Arabia and Iran. You know, one of the criticisms I've had of Senator Sanders is his suggestion that, Iranian troops be used to try to end the war in Syria
your
and
time
go
is up,
after
Secretary.
ISIS,
Let me
which
just-
I don't think would be a good
Okay,
idea.
Senator,
but
let me-
overall, a lot of the forces at work in the region are ones that we cannot directly influence, but we
right,
can
let me
try
suggest-
to bring
Have time.
more
We still
help
lack
to
human
the
let me just
intelligence to
suggest
understand what
this.
happens next.
Where Secretary Clinton and I think, I agree with most of what she said, but where I think we do have an honest disagreement is that in the incredible quagmire of Syria, where it's hard to know who's fighting who, and if you give arms to this guy, it may end up in ISIS's hands the next day. We all know that. And we all know, no argument, the Secretary is absolutely right. Assad is a butcher of his own people, man using chemical weapons against his own people. This is beyond disgusting. But I think in terms of our priorities in the region, our first priority must be the destruction of ISIS. Our second priority must be getting rid of Assad through some political settlement, working with Iran, working with Russia. But the immediate task is to bring all interests together who want to destroy ISIS, including Russia, including Iran, including our Muslim allies, to make that the major priority.
But in all of that, Senator and Secretary, I think we're leaving out something very important here. And that is that we still don't have the human intelligence, overt in terms of diplomatic intelligence or covert, to understand even what the heck happens as the secondary and tertiary effects of some of these things. We are walking through this region, Andrea, without the human intelligence that we need. And we need to make a renewed investment as a country into bringing up a new generation of foreign service officers and bringing up a new generation of business people and in actually understanding and having relationships in these places so we have a better sense of what the heck happens after a dictator topples and can take action to prevent another safe haven and another iteration of terror.
Your time is up.
Yes,
Lester.
Senator Sanders mentioned Russia a moment ago. Secretary Clinton, you famously handed Russia's foreign minister a reset button in 2009. Since then, Russia has annexed Crimea, fomented a war in Ukraine, provided weapons that downed an airliner, and launched operations, as we just discussed, to support Assad in Syria. As president, would you hand Vladimir Putin a reset button?
Well, it depended upon what I got for it, and I can tell you what we got in the first term. We got a New START treaty to reduce nuclear weapons between the United States and Russia. We got permission to resupply our troops in Afghanistan by traveling across Russia. We got Russia to sign on to our sanctions against Iran and other very important commitments. So, look, in diplomacy, you are always trying to see how you can figure out the interests of the other to see if there isn't some way you can advance your security and your values. When Putin came back in the fall of 2011, it was very clear he came back with a mission. And I began speaking out as soon as that happened because there were some fraudulent elections held and Russians poured out into the streets to demand their freedom, and he cracked down and, in fact, accused me of fomenting it. So we now know that he has a mixed record, to say the least, and we have to figure out how to deal with him.
What's your relationship with him?
Well, my relationship with him, it's interesting. It's it's one I think of respect. We've had some very tough dealings with one another, and I know that he's someone that you have to continually stand up to because, like many bullies, he is somebody who will take as much as he possibly can unless you do. And we need to get the Europeans to be more willing to stand up. I was pleased they put sanctions on after Crimea and eastern Ukraine and the downing of the airliner, but we've got to be more united in preventing Putin from taking a more aggressive stance in Europe and the Middle East.
We want to turn right now to the issue of balancing national security concerns with the privacy rights of Americans. That brings us to YouTube and this question.
Hi, my name is Marquez Brownlee, and I've been making YouTube videos about electronics and gadgets for the past 7 years. I think America's future success is tied to getting all kinds of tech right. Tech companies are responsible for the encryption technology to protect personal data, but the government wants a backdoor into that information. So do you think it's possible to find common ground, and where do you stand on privacy versus security?
So, Governor O'Malley.
Thank you. I believe whether it's a back door or a front door, that the American principle of law should still hold, that our federal government should have to get a warrant, whether they want to come through your back door or your front door. And I also agree, Lester, with Benjamin Franklin, who said no people should ever give up their privacy or their freedoms in a promise for security. So we're a collaborative people. We need collaborative leadership here with Silicon Valley and other bright people in my own state of Maryland around the NSA that can actually figure this out. But there are certain immutable principles that will not become antique things in our country so long as we defend our country and its values and its freedoms. And one of those things is our right to be secure in our homes and our right to expect that our federal government should have to get a warrant. I also want to say that while we've made some progress on the Patriot Act, I do believe that we need an adversarial court system there. We need a public advocate. We need to develop jurisprudence so that we can develop a body of law that protects the privacy of Americans in the information and digital age.
That's Tom. You have all talked about what you would do fighting ISIS over there, but we've been hit in this country by homegrown terrorists, from Chattanooga to San Bernardino, the recent shooting of a police officer in Philadelphia. How are you going to fight lone wolves here,
Yeah, Lester, year in and year out, I was the leader of the U.S.
That's a question, Senator Sanders. I wasn't clear. I apologize.
Okay. I just wanted to add, in the previous question, I voted against the USA Patriot Act for many of the reasons that Governor O'Malley mentioned. But it is not only the government that we have to worry about, it is private corporations. You would all be amazed, or maybe not, about the amount of information private companies and the government has in terms of the websites that you access, the products that you buy, where you are this very moment. And it is very clear to me that public policy has not caught up with the explosion of technology. So yes, we have to work with Silicon Valley to make sure that we do not allow ISIS to transmit information.
But in terms of lone wolves, the threat, how would you do it?
What we have got to do there is, among other things, as I was just saying, have Silicon Valley help us to make sure that information being transmitted through the internet or in other ways by ISIS is in fact discovered. But I do believe we can do that without violating the constitutional and privacy rights of the American people.
We have to go to a break, and when we come back, we're going to get to some of the burning questions these candidates have yet to answer and we're really eager to talk about.
What is correct, and I'm disappointed that Secretary Clinton's campaign has made this criticism. It's a Republican criticism. Secretary Clinton does know a lot about health care. And she understands, I believe, that a Medicare for All single-payer program will substantially lower the cost of health care for middle-class families. So what we have got to acknowledge, and I hope the Secretary does, is we are doing away with private health insurance premiums. So instead of paying $10,000 to Blue Cross or Blue Shield, yes, some middle-class families would be paying slightly more in taxes, but the result would be that that middle-class family would be saving some $5,000 in health care costs. A little bit more in taxes, do away with private health insurance premiums. It's a pretty good deal.
long term, we need to develop new alliances. We need a much more proactive national security strategy that reduces these threats before they rise to a level where it feels like we need to pull for a division of Marines. And I also want to add one other thing here. I appreciate the fact that in our debate, we don't use the term you hear Republicans throwing around, trying to look all bravado and macho, sending other kids into combat. They keep using the term boots on the ground. A woman in Burlington, Iowa said to me, Governor, when you're with your colleagues, please don't refer to my son, who has served 2 tours of duty in Iraq, as a pair of boots on the ground. We need to be mindful of learning the lessons of the past.
I have a question.
To Charleston, as we were going to a break, Secretary Clinton, I cut you off. I'll give you 30 seconds to respond on the issue of lone wolves.
Can I get 30 seconds too?
Let's do it. Secretary Clinton.
Well, I wanted to say, and I'll do it quickly, I was very pleased that leaders of President Obama's administration went out to Silicon Valley last week and began exactly this conversation about what we can do consistent with privacy and security. We need better intelligence cooperation. We need to be sure that we're getting the best intelligence that we can from friends and allies around the world. And then we've got to recognize our first line of defense against lone wolf attacks is among Muslim Americans. And it is not only shameful, it is dangerous for the kinds of comments you're hearing from the Republican side. We need to be reaching out and unifying our country against terrorist attacks and lone wolves and working with Muslim Americans
Andrea
to do
has a follow-up.
that.
Just a quick follow-up, though, Secretary Clinton. Just a moment, Governor.
Get my 30 seconds?
But Secretary
Please?
Clinton, you said that the leaders from the intelligence community went to Silicon Valley. They were flatly turned down. They got nowhere.
That is not what I've heard. Let me leave it at that.
Andrea, I need to talk about Homeland Security and preparedness. Ever since the attacks of September 11th, 30 seconds, ever since the attacks of September 11th, my colleagues, Democratic and Republican mayors, Democratic and Republican governors, made me their leader on Homeland Security and preparedness. Here in the homeland, unlike combating ISIL abroad, we're almost like it's your body's immune system. It's able to protect your body against bad bugs, not necessarily because it outnumbers them, but it's better connected. The fusion centers, the biosurveillance systems, better prepared first responders. But there's another front in this battle, and it is this. That's the political front. And if Donald Trump wants to start a registry in our country of people by faith, he can start with me, and I will sign up as one who is totally opposed to his fascist appeals that wants to vilify American Muslims. That can do more damage to our democracy than anything.
All right, that's time, and we do have to move on. Secretary Clinton, this is the first time
Can I just get a very brief response? Very brief.
30 seconds, Senator.
Okay. And I agree with what the Secretary said and what Governor O'Malley said. But here's an issue that we also should talk about. We have a $600 billion military budget. It is a budget larger than the next 8 countries. Unfortunately, much of that budget continues to fight the old Cold War with the Soviet Union. Very little of that budget, less than 10%, actually goes into fighting ISIS and international terrorism. We need to be thinking hard about making fundamental changes in the priorities of the Defense Department.
All right, Secretary Clinton, this is the first time that a spouse of a former president could be elected president. You have said that President Clinton would advise you on economic issues, but be specific if you can. Are you talking about a kitchen table role on economics, or will he have a real policy role?
Well, it'll start at the kitchen table. We'll see how it goes from there. And to have the very best advisors that I can possibly have. And when it comes to the economy and what was accomplished under my husband's leadership in the 90s, especially when it came to raising incomes for everybody and lifting more people out of poverty than at any time in recent history, you bet I'm going to ask for his ideas, I'm going to ask for his advice, and I'm going to use him as a goodwill emissary to go around the country to find the best ideas we've got. Because I do believe, as he said, everything that's wrong with America has been solved somewhere in America. We just have to do more of it, and we have to reach out, especially into poor communities and communities of color, to give more people their own chance to get ahead.
Senator Sanders, a 30-second response here.
Great ideas from Governor O'Malley, Secretary Clinton. But here's the truth. If you have an administration stacked with Wall Street appointees, you ain't going to accomplish very much. So here's a promise that I make. And I mentioned a moment ago how corrupt the system is. Goldman Sachs, paying a $5 billion fine, gives this country in recent history a Republican Secretary of Treasury, a Democratic Secretary of Treasury. Here's a promise. If elected president, Goldman Sachs is not going to bring forth a Secretary of Treasury for a Sanders administration.
Senator Sanders, let me ask you a question. You called Bill Clinton's past transgressions, quote, totally, totally, totally disgraceful and unacceptable. Senator, do you regret saying that?
I was asked a question. You know, one of the things, Andrea, and that question annoys me. I cannot walk down the street, Secretary Clinton knows this, without being told how much I have to attack Secretary Clinton. Want to get me on the front pages of the paper? I make some vicious attack. I have avoided doing that, trying to run an issue-oriented campaign. I was asked a question.
You didn't have to answer it that way, though.
Well,
why did you?
then if I don't answer it, then there's another front page story. Yes. And I mean this seriously. You know that. We've been through this. Yes, his behavior was deplorable. Have I ever once said a word about that issue? No, I have not. I'm going to debate Secretary Clinton, Governor O'Malley on the issues facing the American people, not Bill Clinton's personal behavior.
We will take a break. We'll continue from Charleston right after this.
I'm getting ready to do something too. I'm running for president.
Today, I'm formally entering the race for the Democratic nomination for president.
And it may very well be that that process, by the time we get through it, closes the window on mounting a realistic campaign.
Hundreds of thousands of bright, capable young people are giving up the dream of a higher education because their families do not have enough money.
Good to meet you. How old are you? Are you 3 years old? Oh. They were all doing yoga when they were in town.
Oh my gosh, I love yoga.
In 1999, you voted for the very bill that made banks bigger.
The Glass-Steagall was my very first vote. I just arrived. My dad had died in office. I was appointed to the office. It was my very first vote.
Are you saying you didn't know what you were voting for?
I just arrived at Senate.
I'd have to say the enemy soldier that threw the grenade that wounded me, but he's not around right now to talk to.
All right, time for closing statements.
The American people want to know whether we're going to have a democracy or an oligarchy as a result of Citizens United. Enough of the emails. Let's talk about the real issues facing America.
And other questions still lingered. And these questions lingered because previous investigations were not thorough.
It would have happened long ago. The fact of the matter is, and let's say it in our debate because you'll never hear this from that immigrant-bashing carnival barker, Donald Trump, the truth of the matter is,
I was sick and tired of Hillary Clinton's email. I am still sick and tired of Hillary Clinton's email. And the issue is, the problem is the front pages every day we're dealing with that. I didn't know I had so much power. But after I said that, we're not hearing much about Hillary Clinton.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
And we believe Secretary Clinton will be coming around the corner any minute.
Sorry. The first line of defense against radicalization is in the Muslim American community. I worry greatly that the rhetoric coming from the Republicans, particularly Donald Trump, is sending a message to Muslims here in the United States and literally around the world that there is a clash of civilizations, that there is some kind of Western plot or even war against Islam, which then, I believe, fans the flames of radicalization.
Senator Sanders, you fired a campaign staffer. You have sued the Democratic National Committee. All of this after your campaign acknowledged that some of your staffers, quote, irresponsibly accessed data from another campaign. The Clinton campaign called this a very egregious breach of data and ethics and said, quote, our data was stolen.
The DNC vendor screwed up. Information came to our campaign. In this case, our staff did the wrong thing. They looked at that information. As soon as we learned that they looked at that information, we fired that person. We are now doing an independent internal investigation.
Welcome back, everybody. Finally, before we go tonight, we set out here to understand points of differences between you. We believe we've learned a lot here, but before we leave, is there anything that you really wanted to say tonight that you haven't gotten a chance to say? And we'll start with Governor O'Malley. Didn't see that coming, did you?
Much, but we're going to have to get 20 minutes to do it. So, look, I believe there are many issues. What, 60 seconds for this?
60 seconds. We appreciate it.
There are so many issues that we haven't been able to discuss here. We have not fully discussed immigration reform and the deplorable number of immigrant detention camps that our nation's now maintaining. We haven't discussed the shameful treatment that the people of Puerto Rico, our fellow Americans, are being treated with by these hedge funds that are working them over. We haven't discussed the fact that in our own hemisphere we have the danger of nation-state failures because of drug traffickers in Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador. I guess the bottom line is this. Look, we are a great people when we act at home and abroad based on the beliefs that unite us. Our belief in the dignity of every person, our belief in our own common good. There is no challenge that is too great for us to overcome, provided we bring forward in these divided times new leadership that can heal our divides here at home and bring our principles into alignment abroad. We're on the threshold of a new era of American progress, and I believe we have only need to join forces together and cross that threshold into a new era of American prosperity.
And that's time.
Thanks a lot.
Secretary Clinton.
Well, Lester, I spent a lot of time last week being outraged by what's happening in Flint, Michigan, and I think every single American should be outraged. We've had a city in the United States of America where the population, which is poor in many ways and majority African American, has been drinking and bathing in lead-contaminated water. And the governor of that state acted as though he didn't really care. He had requests for help that he basically stonewalled. I'll tell you what, if the kids in a rich suburb of Detroit had been drinking contaminated water and being bathed in it, there would have been action. So I sent my top campaign aide down there to talk to the mayor of Flint, to see what I could do to help. And I issued a statement about what we needed to do, and then I went on a TV show and I said it was outrageous that the governor hadn't acted, and within 2 hours he had. I want to be a president who takes care of the big problems and the problems that are affecting the people of our country every day.
Thank you. Senator Sanders.
But Secretary Clinton was right, and what I did, which I think is also right, is demanded the resignation of the governor. A man who acts that irresponsibly should not stay in power. Now, we are a great nation, and we've heard a lot of great ideas here tonight. But let's be honest and let's be truthful. Very little is going to be done to transform our economy and to create the kind of middle class we need unless we end a corrupt campaign finance system which is undermining American democracy. We have got to get rid of super PACs. We have got to get rid of Citizens United. And what we have got to do is create a political revolution which revitalizes American democracy, which brings millions of young people and working people into the political process to say loudly and clearly that the government of the United States of America belongs to all of us and not just a handful of wealthy campaign contributors.
All right. Well, thank you. And thanks to all of you for being here tonight, shedding light on some of the differences as Americans get ready to vote. I also want to thank the Congressional Black Caucus Institute and certainly my friend and colleague, Andrea Mitchell. This has been great. It's been a great, spirited conversation, and American people appreciate it. Let me turn it over to my friend Chuck Todd now. Chuck?
Lester, thank you, and a terrific job moderating this debate tonight. Andrea as well. What a lively, substantive debate. We thought there were going to be fireworks. There certainly were. You heard sort of the sharp disagreements when it comes to guns, when it comes to Wall Street reform, when it comes to health care, and even a few things on foreign policy. We're going to break all of it down here in a few minutes, but we're going to try to sneak in a short break, and when we come back, instant analysis. We'll see if we find out what the campaigns are doing. We're live right here in the Spin Room in Charleston, South Carolina.
Hey, we loved it.
This is the first time that a spouse of a former president could be elected president. You have said that President Clinton would advise you on economic issues, but be specific if you can. Are you talking about a kitchen table role on economics, or will he have a real policy role?
Well, it'll start at the kitchen table. We'll see how it goes from there. And I'm going to have the very best advisors that I can possibly have. And when it comes to the economy and what was accomplished under my husband's leadership in the 90s, especially when it came to raising incomes for everybody and lifting more people out of poverty than at any time in recent history, you bet I'm going to ask for his ideas, I'm going to ask for his advice, and I'm going to use him as a goodwill emissary to go around the country to find the best ideas we've got.
Yeah, it's easy to get rid of a two-bit dictator like Saddam Hussein, but there wasn't the kind of thought as to what happens the day after you get him and what kind of political vacuum occurs and who rises up. Groups like ISIS. So I think that President Obama made a promise to the American people when he ran. And he said, you know what, I'm going to do my best to bring American troops home. And I supported what he did. Our job is to train and provide military support for Muslim countries in the area who are prepared to take on ISIS. And one point I want to make here that is not made very often. You have incredibly wealthy countries in that region. Countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like Qatar. Qatar happens to be the largest, wealthiest country per capita in the world. They have got to start putting in some skin in the game and not just ask the United States to do it.
Welcome back to Charleston, South Carolina. We just finished up the fourth Democratic debate of the cycle, the last one before Democrats start going to the polls in Iowa, New Hampshire. I'm joined here by Eugene Robinson of the Washington Post, a South Carolina native. And Eugene, I think this debate's going to be known as the Bernie Sanders debate.
Yeah, it was all focused on Bernie Sanders, really. What he has said in the past, what he hasn't said in the past, what he's done in the did he criticize President Obama at one point? Did he not? What is his record on guns? What are his proposals on health care? There were some very lively clashes between the two.
You know, normally when you'd say, if you were the Clinton campaign and they heard us saying, boy, this debate was all about Bernie Sanders, they would say, oh, geez, what about us? But I get the sense they're okay with that. They kind of, they want to see how he holds up in the spotlight.
Yeah, and you know, she is a very good counterpuncher. And so it was very much her counterpunching against the Sanders thesis, basically, that what we need is revolutionary change. She's not about revolutionary change. She's about evolutionary change, sometimes incremental change.
Right. Sometimes we talk about people wrapping themselves in the flag. Hillary Clinton was wrapping herself in President Obama tonight. We were looking at, there is instance after instance where it's like, I plan on building upon what President Obama did. It was Dodd-Frank, it was healthcare, and it was clearly designed to say, Bernie Sanders, he's not wrapping himself in Obama.
Absolutely, and there's such a historical resonance here, of course, because 8 years ago, the South Carolina primary between Obama and Clinton was perhaps the nastiest of all, and the bitterness with which they clashed at that point is in stark contrast, to say the least, with the way she embraced Obama as a person, as a leader, embraced all his policies, said, we can't do what Bernie Sanders wants to do on health care because we have to continue the Affordable Care Act.
Well, we shall see. I have a feeling this is just the beginning of what's going to be a lively final 15 days before the voting. We'll have continuing live analysis of tonight's debate on MSNBC.com. And if you missed part of this debate, you can see it again starting right now on MSNBC. For now, I'm Chuck Todd in Charleston, South Carolina. For Lester Holt and Andrea Mitchell, we say goodnight. Not MSNBC.com. And good evening from Charleston, South Carolina. I'm Chuck Todd. It was the debate we've been waiting for, the one that finally lived up to the hype on the Democratic side. And it seemed to be all about Bernie Sanders tonight, who was very much on offense, well, and defense. Tonight in this final debate before the voting begins in this year's presidential primary season, with the Iowa caucuses just about 2 weeks from now, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and Martin O'Malley took the stage here at the Gilliard Center in Charleston. They engaged in some heated exchanges on key issues such as health care, guns in America, and Wall Street's influence in this election. I'm being joined here in the spin room in this hour by Eugene Robinson. He's, of course, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the Washington Post and an MSNBC analyst. So, Eugene, as we were talking about it right at the tail end of the debate, this was the Bernie Sanders debate.
It really was. It was all about Bernie Sanders. He has proposed ideas. He's proposed revolutionary change. Hillary Clinton very much pushed back against that and pushed back against various aspects of Bernie Sanders' record, especially on guns. She was on the offense on the gun issue. On Wall Street, which was one of the more interesting clashes, I thought, the tables were turned in a way, and he very much went after her for taking hundreds of thousands of dollars in speaking fees.
Well, let's go to some highlights here. Let's go to the highlights here. One of the first heated exchanges tonight was over health care. And here was Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders arguing over the cost of Bernie Sanders' proposal.
We have the Affordable Care Act. That is one of the greatest accomplishments of President Obama, of the Democratic Party, and of our country. And we have already seen 19 million Americans get insurance. We have seen the end of pre-existing conditions keeping people from getting insurance. We have seen women no longer paying more for our insurance than men, and we have seen young people up to the age of 26 being able to stay on their parents' policy. Now, there are things we can do to improve it, but to tear it up and start over again, pushing our country back into that kind of a contentious debate, I think is the wrong direction.
I have to talk about something that's actually working in our state.
No one is tearing this up. We're going to go forward. But what the Secretary neglected to mention, not just the 29 million still have no health insurance, that even more are underinsured with huge co-payments and deductibles. The vision from FDR and Harry Truman was health care for all people as a right in a cost-effective way. We're not going to tear up the Affordable Care Act. I helped write it. But we are going to move on top of that to a Medicare for all system.
You know, Eugene, what was interesting there about Bernie Sanders' defense of his larger proposal is some of the talking points were Republican talking points that you hear about complaints about Obamacare. Large premiums, underinsured. Where have I heard that before? Hillary Clinton, though, very much defending this whole thing. I mean, I think that was as easy of a way to show an example of what this debate was about tonight.
It was what this debate was about, and it's what these two candidates are about, really. I mean, Hillary Clinton, let's talk about her record on health care. She tried for what was essentially a single-payer system when her husband was in office. She failed at that. She has now embraced the approach President Obama took. She